Hello, it's me, and I'd like to talk about what is a cuboid. How do we classify cuboids? Well, if we start off at the very basic level of a cube, a 3x3, this is the simplest version of which you reduce everything down to. Now, I know there's 2x2s, but you don't reduce puzzles down to a 2x2. This is the basic component, the smallest building block of what you take all higher order puzzles and reduce it down to. 4x4s, 6x6s, 5x5s, doesn't matter. You turn it all into a 3x3 because that's basically the structure that all those higher order puzzles can be reduced down to. Center, edges, corners, 3 layers, symmetric, shifting 90 degrees, turning 90 degrees in all directions. That's what makes the 3x3 so compelling, is because that's ultimately what all puzzles, cubes, are reduced down to in order to solve. So what then is a cuboid? Well, a cuboid is like a humanoid, something that looks human but is a little skewed. And what a cuboid is it's something that is more rectangular. So they add extra layers or subtract extra layers. And the way that I like to look at cuboids is based on a classification that I use in terms of solve strategy. How do you solve it? Just like an even layer puzzle is different from an odd layer puzzle because of the notion of parity, so too there's different types of cuboids that are out there. And I've had a lot of questions regarding how I classify it. And again, I don't classify it so much based on the shape, I classify it based on the solve strategy, which has a lot to do with the structure. So I'm going to bring out the first category of cuboids that I have. The category that, just like the Rubik's Cube, represents the one that all other cuboids are ultimately reduced down to in terms of solving. And that's this guy over here. Now, it's very obvious to see that the main difference between a cube and a cuboid in this case is you hack out one layer. Now this kind of a cuboid I'm going to classify as a domino. The reason why I call it that is I think the original 3x3x2 actually had dominoes on all the ends, but the way that you solve it almost acts like a domino, where one piece is solved and then the piece just below that is solved as well. So there's a lot of swapping that goes on. With this, it's mostly placement and algorithms that 3-cycle and whatnot. This is mostly swapping from back to forth. So the domino structure basically takes the form of n by n plus o by n plus o, or n by n by n plus o. And o is basically any odd number. Now, o being an odd number has certain properties that are interesting, because if it's an odd number, you're generally multiples of 1, 3, or 5 off from your base layer, so 3x3x2. If you have that, then one side is going to be even and the other side is going to be odd, which means you have odd to even asymmetry. What that means is that you don't shapeshift. So we have 2 here, we have 3 here. If I turn it by 90 degrees, it doesn't shapeshift. So the solve strategy is very similar with that. So if O is an odd number, then you're going to have asymmetry between odd and even. So an example, if I were to continue with this concept, this is a 3x3x2. We've got a 4x4x3, same kind of thing. I can move 90 degrees here, but I can't shapeshift in that direction, but I can shapeshift in this direction. This is from Garrett at his Shapeways shop. To those who would want to know, if you want me to, I could post a link to it. And then, of course, the next step is the mass-produced 5x5x4, same kind of thing. Now, it doesn't have to have this type of organization. This is an example of n by n plus o by n plus o, but there's also n by n by n plus o, starting off with something like this. Now, this is the 2x2x3, but it still displays the same properties. So I really like to classify these as pretty much the same, even though they have slightly different functions. The next one up is going to be the 3x3x4, which displays similar characteristics of asymmetry. One is odd, one is even, so you can't shapeshift. And of course the mass-produced 4x4x5 rather. And the solve strategy is the same. So the characteristics of these is they don't shapeshift, and ultimately you want to do domino strategy. The domino strategy, and I'll tell you that all cuboids basically want to be converted to this. Just like all cubes want to be converted to this cousin, the cuboid, they all want to be converted to this. Because once you do that, you can move things around by doing edge swaps and corner swaps. There is the adjacent edge swap, where these two swap with each other, and that algorithm is 2r u, 2r u, 2r 2u, 2r 2u, 2r u, 2r ui, 2r. So you'll see a clean swap between these two. You also have opposite edge swaps between this and this. 2R, 2U, 2R, 2U, 2R, 2U. And that swapped these two over here. In terms of corners, you can swap from here to here, or you can swap from here to here. These two can swap, or these two can swap. To swap from top to the bottom, which brings this down to here and flips it, you just do the algorithm 2R, U, 2R, UI, 2R. And among other things, what it did is it basically swapped these. This came down to here, and this came down to here, and flip-flopped. In addition, you can do the adjacent corner swap between these two, and that's going to be 2R, U, 2R, UI, 2R. And then the top turns by a UI, the bottom turns by a D, or I could have just turned the whole thing, 2R, U, 2R, UI, 2R. And then this bottom one moves back. So what that did is it swapped these two. So what was here was blue and orange, and that swapped over here. The centers also swap, but we don't really care about that. Those are the basic algorithms, and that's what you want to convert every cuboid into using those algorithms. So basically, that's really what you're doing with these kind of cuboids. If you take this, I'm ultimately going to be converting this into a 3x3x2. I'm going to be putting my edges together. I've got my corners here. I'm going to be putting this in so that this is kind of taken out of the picture, so to speak. Edges here, and then between here and here, I'm just using the same cuboid strategy with this. Same thing with this. It's just more complicated. We got to get our centers, edges. We basically convert it into a 3, 1, 2, 3 by 2, 1, 2. After we do 1, 2 by 3, coming back over here. So it's the same basic strategy. And I'll also say that doing the n by n plus O, it's the same kind of thing. You're basically converting this into a 3 by 3, a 3 by 2, these two, or these two. So 3 by 3 by 2. Same thing if you were to do this guy over here, the 4 by 4 by 5, and those tutorials that I've done, we get the centers, we get the edges, and then basically do the other layers and convert them into basically this domino form. So these are what I would call the domino cuboids. So we have this as our base cube, and then we've got the dominoes. This is our base domino here, branch off into here, branch off into here. And then, of course, you've got the other base domino, which is this, which is not what we reduce it to any more than we reduce any cubes to a 2 by 2. This will come over here, this will come here, and this will come here, showing us parts of our basic family of puzzles right now. So the other type of cuboid that we have that is solved slightly differently is we go from those that are non-shapeshifting to those that are actually shapeshifting. So these I don't call the dominoes, I just call these the shapeshifting cuboid. And the basic smallest unit of that is going to take the form of n by n by n plus p, where p is any even number. So if you take any even number and add it to n, you're going to end up with something with even to even symmetry or odd to odd symmetry. So taking a look at this, 2 by 2 by 4. N is 2, p is 2 plus n, which in this case would be 4. Now the characteristics of this, unlike the dominoes, is that the way the structures of these cubes are is when you turn it 90 degrees, you can actually continue the course of shapeshifting, which does change the solve strategy because now this can move 90 degrees in all directions. So this is these are purely shape-shifting cuboids where you can do 90-degree turns in all directions. Now this is not what we reduce it to. The next step up with this, the 2 by 2 by 4, go up to 3, so you'd have 3 by 3 by 5. So this will display the same characteristics. You can move it 90 degrees in all directions. This one is Smaz's 3 by 3 by 5. There it is, Smaz. So really very well built. And if we were to move up from there even further, of course we've got the 4 by 4 by 6. The celebrated 4 by 4 by 6. Really excellently moved. So what is the difference in solve strategies with these? Well, if you can move everything in 90-degree increments, then basically what you can do is you can solve it a lot like a 3x3, because this moves 90 degrees in all directions, these move 90 degrees in all directions. The main difference, though, is that because you have extra layers, inevitably, when you do one of your shape-shifting, you end up with bandaging, which means certain layers, certain pieces are not going to be accessible to you. And that's going to be important because as you move into higher orders of shape-shifting cuboids, you're going to have more and more layers that are not accessible to you, basically. Now notice that with the dominoes, I lumped the n by n plus o by n plus o and the n by n plus o together. In other words, I lumped this, these, and I lumped these together. The 3x3x2 and the 3x3x4 together, even though their formula is a little different. And I did that because the solve strategy is the same. However, I am not lumping the n by n plus p by n plus p together with n by n by n plus p. I actually classify that different because my solve strategy is different. I'm going to delve into the solve strategy more with these, but basically what you do is, because you could solve it a lot like a cube, in the scrambled form, you solve it based upon the lowest denominator, lowest common denominator of your lowest layer. So if this is, say, a 3x3x5, once you scramble it, you have to solve it first like a 3x3. You do that in order to get it back to the cuboid form. Once you get it back to the cuboid form, what you'll have is this top will be in, this middle will be in, and this will be in, and you'll just have these two, which means you will have reduced this effectively to a 3x3x2. You will have reduced it to the core cuboid, which is the 3x3x2. Same thing with the 4x4x6. If I were to scramble this, the lowest common denominator is going to be a 4x4. So I'm basically going to solve it like a 4x4, which means doing center reduction, center placement, and then edge placement. Once I do that, I'll end up with a situation where this is in, and then I'll have these guys in here because the middles, this will be considered as edges, and this will be a middle. So I do my 4x4 solve. These will be in, which will just leave these two. This will be reduced, and I'll end up with a 3, 1, 2, 3, by 3, 1, 2, 3, by 2, 1, 2. Once again, down to here. So it's really a question of reducing it. You can take the same strategy straight on up to whatever, 5x5x7, 7x7x9, and solve it exactly the same way. So let's put together our family tree here again and add these guys here. Let's get a little wide angle shot here. So again, we have the dominoes consisting of these sets here, the n by n plus o by n plus o, and the n by n by n plus o, all solve the same. Then you've got the shapes, so these are the dominoes. We've got the shape-shifting cuboids, which are the n by n by n plus p, where p equals 2. So the next category is another shape-shifting category, which I would define as the floppy cube. So here's the archetypic floppy over here. This is a 3x3x1. What makes this basically floppy, what this form is this is the n by n plus p by n plus p. These are the n by n plus p. This is the n by n plus p by n plus p. Now, why do I not categorize this the same way as these guys? Why do I separate this out? Well, the reason for that is because we get a very strange property that happens when you merge with this. Now, because this is 1 over here and this is 3 over here, if I move this up to here, I should be able to shapeshift, but because of the structure, I might not be able to do that. Or can I? Based on how the structure is, I can actually shapeshift this particular brand, which is kind of cool. So anyway, so this one can actually do some shapeshifting. But again, we don't reduce it to a 3x1. The next example of that is the 4x4x2. So the 4x4x2 is I guess the next step up with that, but we don't reduce this floppy to this floppy. Instead, we once again reduce it from here, to the 3x3x2. And this one, of course, is a shapeshifter in all directions, but it displays in the reductive process a potential parity, which is what I call the floppy parity. And this is unique. You don't get this when you have this puzzle versus this puzzle. although that's why I classify them as the same, but I don't classify them as the same as here. So even though these n by n plus p shapeshifts in all directions, just like the n by n plus p also shapeshifts in all directions, there's a way of reducing it incorrectly. And when you reduce it incorrectly, you reduce it to a 3 by 3 by 2 in a way that could never have been scrambled into that. And there's ways of getting out of that, which I have shown and will show again. But basically, you reduce the edge, you reduce the centers, and you end up with a 3 by 3 by 2, hopefully without parity. The other example that I've shown is the next step up with that, which is the 3 by 5 by 5. So 2 by 4 by 4, 3 by 5 by 5. These are the next step up, but same thing, you're reducing it to a 3 by 3 by 2, being careful of the floppy parity that you're going to get. So those are the floppies. If we were to put these together over here, put our little family tree together here. And this goes here, this goes here. Not you yet. So here we are, like this, where we've got our cuboids, we've got our shapeshifters, and we've got our higher order floppies. The final kind of cuboid is what I call the bricks. Now these are fun ones. The bricks basically take the form of n by n plus o by n plus p, where o is of course any odd number and p is any even number. And the archetypic simplest version of that is this, the 1 by 2 by 3. What's interesting about this is that this shape shifts only in one direction, but not the other direction. So in this case, here's a 1 that goes to a 3, and normally you should be able to shapeshift with this, and this one actually can. Pretty neat, huh? So this one is does display the shape-shifting capacity in those directions. But the one that's classic, or the one that we think of more, this is the 1 by 2 by 3. Then of course you've got the 2 by 3 by 4, sort of. Anyway, this displays shape-shifting in not the 3 by 4 side. So this one has to go all the way across. But if you hold it like this, the 2 by 4 does display shape-shifting, but only in this axis, but not in this axis over here. The next step up above that, of course, is the 3 by 4 by 5, and it's the same kind of thing. Because this is a brick, you do not shapeshift in this axis, but you can shapeshift, well, you don't shapeshift in this axis, but you can shapeshift in this axis. The solve strategy with this is also very different than, of course, the 4 by 5 by 6, another Tom Z creation. Again, just shape-shifting in one of its axes, but not both. Always love playing with Tom's puzzles. So anyway, the solve strategy with this is also different in that with the shapeshifter here, you used cube strategy to get it back to the cuboid form and then do your 3 by 2 solve. With this, you also used the lowest common denominator in order to get it back into the cuboid form, and then did the 3 by 3 by 2, but having to deal with floppy parity. With this, you don't use cube form to get it back to the cuboid form, you use cuboid strategy to get it back to the cuboid form, because in essence, by only doing 90 degrees in one direction, it has exactly the same form as the cuboids. 90 degrees here, 180 degrees like this. Same thing with this. 90 degrees here, you can go 90 degrees like this, here, here, don't want to scramble it quite yet, but 180 degrees like this. So because the bricks have that form, it's solved like a cuboid. So you use cuboid strategy to get it back into the cuboid form, and then it's just a matter of doing parity algorithms to get the rest. There is certain types of reductive parities that can happen with this. I've done many demonstrations of viewer dilemmas with that, so you can refer back to those. But anyway, that's how you would divide that. So if I were to move those into position here, As we pan ourselves up above here to once again look at the family tree, let me see if I can get them all on camera, get them all posing on camera here. I'm not sure if I can, but in any case, those are the different types of cuboids and the different strategies. From the straight cuboids where you use domino forms, the dominoes basically, the dominoes taking two different forms to all get it to the 3x3x2. Then you have the shape-shifting cuboids where you use cubic strategy to get it to the cuboid form, and then domino strategy from there as you reduce it to here, to the quote ultimate shapeshifters, which are these guys here, where you once again use cubic strategies to get it to the cuboid form, and then have to do potentially dealing with floppy parities. So you got the dominoes, the shapeshifters, the floppies, and the bricks, where you use cuboid strategy to get it back to the cuboid form, and then parity algorithms to get them back. So that's the strategy that I use. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do examples of that in puzzles that you've not seen quite yet. So as we pull away from this, let's take away our ultimate shapeshifters, our floppies, take away our bricks, take away our shapeshifters, and let's focus in on the dominoes.